Okay, Rabbi Sai, ladies and gentlemen, good evening.
Good evening.
Have you with us?
Good evening. Good evening, brother.
Thank you, Mochi. We're just gonna mute everybody. Sorry, we're just gonna do that. If you have any questions, just unmute yourself. Like to welcome you tonight to tonight's shir. Tonight's shir is on Parasha Vayechi. It is available on Zoom. It's available on Facebook Live. It's also available on Torah Anytime. And we'd like to get some great Torah content. Torah Anytime is your address. Right. Okay. We're going to see tonight a whole bunch of things about the brachas that were given to Yosef, the brachas that were given to the rest of the brothers. There's lots and lots of interesting stuff over here. So let's go into this. So let's start with the following. There's a famous pasuk that if you have an Archgo's Chumash, it's on page 270. It is Perek Memches, pasuk Zayin 48, verse 7. And it goes as follows. Va'ani and I before me Padon when I came from Padon. Meisa alai Rochel. Rochel died be'etz Knaan Aderech in the land of Canaan as I was going on my way. But Od Kibras Es Lavar. For us, it was still a certain amount to go to Ephras, which is about 2,000 amas. V'ok Berel Shem Aderech Ephras, and I buried her there on the way to Ephrat. He Beis Lachem. That's in Bethlehem. Anybody's been to Eretz Yisrael and gone to see Cave Rachel? Cave Rachel is literally minutes outside Jerusalem. From the right kind of shchuna, from the right neighborhood in Eretz Yisrael, if you've ever been, it's like 5 minutes. You're in Jerusalem, so you're like, hey, we're by Cave Rachel. How did that happen? It's literally outside of where modern Jerusalem is today. It takes 5 minutes or so to get there. So Yaakov Avinu is saying, when I was coming from Padon, I was coming from Lavan Arami, and your mother Rachel died on the way, and I buried her over there in Ephrat. This is Beis Lechem. So the question there is, why is he saying this to him? Why is Yaakov Avinu telling him where Rachel died? So there's a famous Rashi. When I was a child in Vienna, so we used to learn in Yiddish, and there's a famous Yiddish saying. I think saying is the wrong way of saying of putting it, but I remember we used to have a big wall, and I used to have a Rebbe who was very, very good with his hands, and he's very good at arts and crafts. And he used to have these little letters of the Aleph base, and he used to have they were like stamps. And he used to stamp the Aleph, and he used to put it on the page. He used to stamp a Dalet, he used to put it on the page. As he's writing a word, he used to stamp it. And he had this massive poster, which was literally like, 2 meters wide by 3 meters high, and it was all about this pasuk. Va'ani und ich. I remember it in Yiddish. And ich bevai mi panas bekimen fin pardon. Chotshik. You had to say with the whole tune. Even though, says Rashi, that I am telling you to bury me, to take me all the way to the land of Canaan. And I didn't do the same thing for your mother. You know what happened to your mother? Your mother died on the way to Ephrat. I didn't even schlep her the 2,000 amas that it took to go to Ephrat. You know what 2,000 amas is? It's like 1 kilometer. I didn't even take her the 1 kilometer to go into the main city of Ephrat. I kept her there on the way of Bethlehem. So you might say, you sure have a chutzpah, daddy. My mother died on the way. Not even 1 kilometer do you schlep her. You're asking me now to take you from here, from Egypt, and schlep you hundreds of miles all the way to Hebron on foot to there. Why should I do that? Why should I give you this treatment when you never gave my mother that same treatment? You don't deserve that. So he says to him, you should know that I didn't do this on my own. I did this because God told me to do this, because God said that at one point or another, the Jewish people are going to go into Golus, they're going to go into exile. He knew they're going to go into exile. And when they're going into exile, they're going to pass by the cave of Rachel Imeinu, and they're going to cry to Rachel, and they're going to say to Rachel, Rachel, help us, get us out of this trouble. And it says, Rachel Imeinu will cry for her children, Koi Barama Nishma. Rachel cries for her children, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Yesh Sachal Yifudai Sechnum Hashem, V'shavu Banim Nigvulam. There is a reward for everything that you have done, and therefore the children will make their way back to their original place, to their boundaries. That is what Rashi says. And according to Rashi, what it seems over here is Yaakov Avinu is more or less trying to get into Yosef's good books. And he's making an excuse. He's saying, listen, Yosef, I know you feel a little bit hard done by. I know you think I didn't work hard enough for your mother to get your mother the burial place that she deserves. And now I'm asking you to give me the burial place that I want to. Well, why should you do that? We should know this is why I did it, and there's a reason why I did it. Okay? According to Rashi, this is what is being said over here. It is someone asking for a favor from someone else and defending himself against the onslaught or against the comments that might come. That is how Rashi sees it. But many of the Mepharshim disagree with Rashi on this one, and they say if Yosef was now going to be told some kind of reason why he didn't bury him and a question, it should go together with the fact that he asked him to bury him in Egypt. If you turn back to page 268, we have a very different conversation. Yosef comes to Yaakov, and Yaakov says to him, if I find favor in your eyes, please swear to me that you will do with me righteousness and truth, and do not bury me in Egypt. And instead, I will be buried with my fathers. You will carry me out of Egypt, and you will bury me where I should be buried. And Yosef says, sorry, I will do as I swear. And there Yaakov should say, and by the way, you should just know, even though you might think that this is treatment that I'm asking of you, where in reality, I don't deserve the treatment because I didn't do the same thing for your mother. So how can I ask you to do this for me? Nevertheless, there was a reason why I did that. That is really what it would seem to have to say. That's where it belongs. If it's Yaakov trying to placate Yosef and to tell him, listen, please understand, there is a reason why I did what I did and don't think it's unfair, then it seems to me that this verse is in an entirely wrong place. It should be much earlier in the Parasha. And therefore, Rav Shimon Schwab says a different reason. Sorry, not Rav Shimon Schwab. Rav Hirsch says something else over here. And he says the following. He says, when it comes to the children and the wives of Yaakov Avinu, we really had two classifications. You have Leah and Rachel, and then you have Bilhah and Zilpah. Leah and Rachel, the original two wives of Yaakov Avinu, and then Yaakov Avinu is given the two maidservants by his two wives to try for each one of them to have more children, to be able to have more of a part in Klal Yisrael. So Bilhah has Dan and Naphtali, and then Zilpah has Gad and Asher. So that was given, they were both given to Yaakov Avinu as a ploy to try to increase the amount of children that they had, each one of them. But they were the maidservants. Then you had the main wives. You have Leah and you have Rachel. And when it comes to Leah, when it comes to Rachel, there's a big difference between the amount of kids that they had. Leah had 6 children. Rachel, unfortunately, only had 2 children. So that Rachel really was an equal part to Bilhah and to Zilpah as far as children was concerned. Leah had the upper hand. Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah all had the same amount of children. There was no difference between the 3 of them. And now it comes to status. And if you look at the status or status, however you want to pronounce it, of these women, you'd say, how would I be able to tell who the main wife of Yaakov Avinu was? Sometimes, even though the living specimen would say one thing, but how has it been eternalized? So what I mean to say is as follows. Yaakov's main domain, Yaakov's main domicile, whilst he was alive, was in the tent of Rachel. When Rachel died, he moved it to somewhere else. But originally it was by Rachel. That was the main place where he slept. And then he took turns sleeping by Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. But the main place where he lived was Rachel. So while he was alive, you could say, yes, this is the main wife. But once she died, how do I know who is his wife for eternity? And many people make a big fuss of this, and quite rightly so. When someone passes away, they want that their spouse should be buried next to them. Why do we want our spouse buried next to us? What difference does it make? We're dead anyway. The answer is we want to be together for eternity, right? We live together. We shared our life together. We shared our children together. We shared our home together. We shared our everything together. And now in death, we want to share that together also. And that is a very, very important thing for many people. It's a very Jewish concept as well. They don't bury the wife somewhere else. You don't bury the husband here and the wife on the other side of the basic verse. Usually bury them next to each other. And even you're going to be very, very frum and you say different rows for different men and different women. So what you do is you bury the man in one row and his wife directly behind him or directly in front of him. So you say 2 rows, but they're right next to each other anyway. They're within touching distance, so to speak. You mean they're dead, but touching distance, if you get what I mean, right? But you put them next to each other because that says, this is my spouse, not only in life, this is the person whom I shared my life with, I shared my neshama with, and I share even in death. And therefore, Clive Sparkley's here, we'll say hello to Clive as well. And therefore, we need to now look at what happens after Yaakov Avinu dies. Hi, Clive. And after Yaakov Avinu dies, there's something interesting that happens over here. Who is buried next to Yaakov? Who was actually the one that was schlepped all the way to Ma'aras HaMachpelah, to the double cave? That was Leah. It was not Rachel. And therefore, says Yaakov Avinu, we have a problem over here. I am not going to be able to show anyone the tremendous closeness and the tremendous love that I had for your mother, Rachel. That's what he's saying to Yosef. Because people will say, well, he didn't have the most kids with her. He didn't bury her next to him. So, you know what? She was just one of the others. And Yaakov Avinu says, I have to do something that people will realize Rachel was as an important a wife to me as Leah is. Yes, I had 6 children with Leah, but that's not because I didn't want to have more children with Rachel. It's because that's how many children Hashem gave Rachel. So I only had 2 children with her. Yes, I'm buried next to Leah, but don't deduce from there that the wife that was important to me was Leah and Rachel wasn't important to me. So you know what? Yeah, she died on the way. Just bury her there. Who cares? I need to schlep her all the way to Ma'aras HaMachpelah. She can stay here. So Yaakov says, I need to show her children. I need something tangible for them to hold on to say, hey, listen, guys, you come from the wife that was most important to me. You come from the woman that was the other half of my neshama. And how am I personally going to prove that to you? You know how I personally prove it to you? By giving you, Yosef, something that makes you a bechor of sorts. Because a bechor, the firstborn, receives the double portion. That's normally what happens. A bechor deserves to receive the double portion. And so therefore, what you have is the bechor really is Reuven. And he should receive the double portion. We'll speak later why he didn't. But he doesn't receive the double portion. So who gets it? So now we're going to pick Yosef. So Yaakov says, I'm going to pick Yosef because I want everybody to know, by making Yosef the Bechar, by giving Yosef a double portion, that his 2 children will now become like 2 shvatim, like 2 tribes. And instead of him counting for 1, he counts for 2. That is my way of pointing out to the world that Rachel held a very deep and important part in my heart. And even though from the outside, just looking in, you might say, Rachel wasn't as important as everybody else. She couldn't have been as important as Leah, not as many children, not buried in the same place. They don't share everything together. So Yaakov says, for me to prove to you that this is where I'm at, this is what I'm giving you. It's very interesting that Rav Sham Shavuot L'Arsh almost makes it personal. Yaakov Avinu, this is a personal gift from Yaakov Avinu to his children, to his son Yosef, to show him and to show the world where he and his part of the family, i.e. Rachel's part of the family, where they stand for eternity, and they're not just to be considered like just another tribe. Okay? Now, we move on to something else. I'm going to skip to what I have something else I want to say in the middle. I'm going to skip to something else first because we mentioned it now. So why is it Taka that Yehuda didn't get why did Reuven not get the double blessing? So I've said some of this beforehand, but I saw it slightly differently tonight, so I'd like to say it again. I'm just going to mention the way I said it in the past. I'm going to say tonight the way I saw it in another sefer, which was also very, very beautiful, which is brought in the name of, it's not the Meshech Chochmah, maybe the Malbim. I can't remember who says it now. I've forgotten. Maybe it was the Malbim. I can't remember who said. Oh no, sorry. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz in the Sichos Musa says this. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, who was the Rosh Yeshiva of Meir Yeshiva about 30, 40 years ago, he says this idea. So what he says is as follows. Excuse me. Ruve Machari Ata. We're on page 274 in the ArtScroll Chumashim, and if you're looking in a Chumash, you're looking Perek Mem Tes, Pasuk Gimel, chapter 49, verse 3. So it says over here, Ruve Machari Ata, Ruven, you are my firstborn. Kochi Reishis Oni. You are my initial strength and my initial vigor, meaning you are my first child, you are the first of my seed. Yeser se'es ve'yeser oz. You deserve to get more in rank and more in strength, meaning you would deserve to get the kehuna, to be the Kohen, and you also deserve to be the firstborn to get a double portion and to become the king. However, pachas kamayim al tosar, water like impetuosity. Sorry, that's a difficult word. Okay, impetuosity. That means you were impetuous, you were quick, you just boom, came out with it. Like water, water flows quickly. So you were impetuous like water, you were quick, you're zealous like water in that way. Therefore, al tosa, that you don't get any extra, because you mounted your father's bed. That means, as the Mefarshim explained, you moved around your father's bed from Bilhah's tent to Leah's tent, and with that you desecrated God who ascended upon my bed. That is the bracha that Reuven gets. And in the past, we've spoken already about the idea that Rav Elia Pian says, that it doesn't say that because you mounted your father's bed, therefore you don't get extra. But rather it says because you were impetuous, that's where you don't get extra. But that doesn't seem to be the issue. The issue was that he moved around the beds. So what we said over there was, and we also asked the question, why couldn't he have done tshuva? So in the past, we said the answer, and I said this in a different shir this week, that Rav Elia Pian says a beautiful idea, and the idea is that there's a difference between punishment and consequences. Punishment is when I'm trying to create some form of deterrent. So let's say you're driving too fast. So you're driving 50 in a 30-mile-an-hour zone. So a cop stops you and he gives you 6 points, not just 3 points, because you're driving 20 miles above the speed limit. And he gives you a fine of 500 pounds and he takes away your license for 6 months, right? Why is he doing that? Because he wants to teach you a lesson. It's not a consequence. This is a punishment, right? A consequence will be very different. Say, for example, you have a little child that's playing with matches, and you tell the child, don't play with matches, it's dangerous. Don't play with matches, it's dangerous. And he plays with the matches and he makes a fire and he burns himself. So then he can apologize from today till tomorrow. He can ask for clemency from today till tomorrow. But the child burned his hand, but that was not a punishment. It's the fire is not trying to punish him. That's a consequence of what happens when you do something that is silly. You play with knives, you could hurt yourself. You play with fire, you could hurt yourself. That's just the way it is. That's not a punishment for playing with a knife. It's not the punishment for playing with matches. It's the consequence of that happening. It's not a deterrent. It's just this is what happens when you do the wrong things. Okay? And therefore we said, the first thing we said, which is what Rav Elia Pian says, is the idea here is that Reuben showed himself to be impetuous, and therefore the consequence of his action is that he doesn't deserve to have the kahuna. He doesn't deserve to have the melucha. Similarly, he writes it also in Rav Chaim Shmulevitz. Rav Chaim Shmulevitz actually points to Shaul HaMelech, and he shows us the same thing in Shaul HaMelech, and he says sometimes this flaw, this fatal flaw of character in an individual, of being impetuous, of getting anxious, of not being able to wait, of having this nerves, it's a terrible thing. And it causes people to do things that are wrong. So you have, for example, we see this twice with Shaul HaMelech, and therefore Shaul HaMelech loses his melucha. He loses his kingship. Why? Because Shaul HaMelech got nervous and bucked. He buckled under the pressure, and he shouldn't have done that. So, for example, the first time we have that is Shaul HaMelech is told You need to wait. The Navi tells him, you got to wait till I come. And when I come, together we will sacrifice this carbon. And Shaul HaMelech is waiting, and the people are getting restless. They're saying, no, no, no. Everyone's screaming no as it goes. This is, Jewish people. Jewish people are, by the way, we as a Jewish people are known for our patience. We have, we are the most patient people in the world. This is a trait that we excel in. It's brilliant. Just to watch it, just to watch it sort of unfold in front of your eyes. How people you come off the plane in Israel, and it's like everyone's moving in one go. It's not like I'm going ahead of you, you're going ahead of me. Like we're all impatient. I'm going to get there first. No, I'll get there first. Just wait. I'm going to get this. There's none of this nice line forming or anything like in England, like you walk nicely and quietly. And here's when everyone goes, whoom, and you're out. Yeah, just very, very impatient. The joke that we like to tell at this time of the year is one of my favorite jokes. There was an El Al plane that was landing in Tel Aviv from New York. And as it was landing, the pilot gets on and says, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for flying with Allah. We love to have you as our guests over here. And then he finishes off. He says, for those of you who are standing already, I wish you a happy Hanukkah. And for those still sitting, have a Merry Christmas. Yeah. But it's the way it is. The plane lands. How long does it take every Jewish person as the plane lands to turn on the mobile phone? They're already holding the mobile phone. It's already on. All you have to push is that little button with the airplane. That God forbid I should have to wait until the gate till I get my text messages. Like as you land, especially when you land with the EasyJet into Tel Aviv, you've just landed. You've landed about 10 seconds ago. You hear it's beeping, buzzing all over the place. Everyone's like, yes, my text messages have come through. It's been 5.5 hours. Goodness gracious, without these messages. I'm so happy they finally come through. We don't have that. We don't have the patience. And Jewish people are getting impatient. And Shaul HaMelech was told by Shmuel the Navi, you need to wait till I come, till I bring this carbon. But the people are going, no, no. And at one point or another, Shaul buckles. And Shaul brings the carbon. He says, look, Shmuel's coming late. He's coming later than I thought. I thought he was supposed to be here at 2. He's not here yet. It's now 2:30. Where is he? People looking at the watch. Where is he? He's pacing up and down. It's 3 o'clock. It's 3:30. He's still not here. By the way, I'm making up these times. The times are not brought in the Navi. But either way, he's waiting and waiting for Shaul. And finally, Shaul says, people are just there's going to be some pandemonium over here. So Shaul just brings the carbon anyway. And Shmuel shows up. He goes, all right, I'm here. And Shaul's like, slightly late. He goes, what do you mean slightly late? I did it right without you. Why didn't you wait? How was I supposed to wait? The people outside were yelling no. They were getting very, very nervous. And Shaul is chastised for that. And Shmuel says at one point or another, you're going to lose the melucha for that. You're going to lose the kingdom for that. Says Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, you know why? Because if under pressure, you go boom, then I can't deal with you. I can't have a king that's going to be king that every time he's got a little bit of pressure, everything goes to pots. I can't have it going haywire. Especially, you're not just a regular guy. You're the king, right? So I expect more from the king, and I need royal behavior. And if you're going to get a little bit of pressure from the people, you know what you should say? You should say, hey guys, I'm the king. We're waiting till Shmuel shows up. Quiet. That's showing leadership. And the opposite is the opposite of leadership. You can't be a leader when a bit of pressure comes and right away you say, oh, well, okay, I'm going to bring the carbon. Why? Just the people getting impatient. I need to keep them happy. What do you mean you need to keep them happy? Who's in charge of whom over here? They're in charge of you, or you're in charge of them? You're their king, or are you just like the schlepper? So the schlepper, every time when you're in your restaurant, the customer's always right. Not just a restaurant, anywhere. The famous thing is the customer's always right, but that's when you see there are customers and I have to keep my customers happy. The balabos is always right. That's the rule in rabbinics. No matter what happens, even if that's how it goes. The balabos in the shul is always right. They once, the joke that they had in Israel, they once came to Israel, there was somebody that was doing a conference over there on customer service and customer satisfaction. And the fellow got up, this American gets up in the middle of Israel and he says, okay, Rabotai, I need to teach you the first rule in customer service. The first and most important rule in customer service is the customer is always right. Yes, sir, you have a question of fun. Yes, excuse me, what if they are wrong? Yeah, of course, right? That's in Israel. What if they are wrong? They're still right, yeah? And that's, I think, you learn the hard way, in many, many occasions in your life. You're just going to have to give in. You have to say they're right anyway. But here you're the king. In the case of a king, it's not a customer. I don't have to keep you happy. I am in charge of this nation. And therefore, I command that we wait another hour until the Navi shows up. And if you cannot wait till the Navi shows up, then that shows that you're not made out of royal material. You don't have what it takes to be a king, because just a little bit of pressure and you go boom, that means you're not a king. And the same thing is true also, you see later on when it comes to the story of Amalek. Story of Amalek, he comes back and he meets up with Shmuel, and Shmuel says to him, he says to Shmuel, hey, Shmuel, Hanavi, Baruch Atah Hashem, you are blessed, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I fulfilled the words of God. And Shmuel is trying to give him a bit of a hint, because Shmuel told him, you have to kill out everybody and you have to kill all the animals. He says, hey, listen, I hear some bleeding over there, and I think that's a cow that I just heard. What's all of that noise? And Shaul says, yeah, Hashacham ala'am. The people, the nation, had rachmanos on their cows and on their sheep, and we're going to bring offerings. And Shmuel goes, I'm not sure that's exactly how the conversation went when we had it originally. That's not exactly what I asked you to do. He goes, I know, but that's what the people wanted, and I did what God asked me to. And he's like, no, that's not what God said. That's not what God wanted from you. God wanted you to kill out the animals. Why did you keep them? He goes, yeah, but what about the people? And you see again over here, he buckles. What about the people? A bit of pressure, a bit of anger, a bit of stress, and everything goes by the wayside. And I've seen this with people. There are certain people, as soon as they get a bit of stress, you have great ideas, you have great things that you're planning on doing. And then just a tiny little bit of stress, and it all goes out the window. I can't do this. Forget it, I can't do it. What do you mean forget you can't do it? I know it's been a stressful situation. It's been a day that's been a little bit more complicated, a little bit more difficult. But you have to throw the whole thing out. Just because the day's been a little bit more stressful, calm down. That doesn't mean that you can't manage the thing that's happening next week. Today was hard. Tomorrow will be better. Today you weren't feeling well. Today you didn't eat well. Today you didn't sleep well. But you can't have somebody, if you don't sleep well, that throws out the entire next week's diary because I didn't sleep well last night. Because I'm stressed now. But that is what happened over here. Reuven loses patience. Reuven sees this and goes, can't have this. And Yaakov Avinu says, I can't have that behavior. And I can't have a leader that behaves like that. And if you're meant to be the leader, and that's how you behave, then I can't have you leading my people. Because I need a leader to be strong as iron. I need a leader that even if things go wrong, he doesn't just melt away. He needs to have some strength. You see that I moved the bed to Billa's room, come and speak to me. Let's have a discussion. Don't just go, I'm going to move this bed right away and go move it. What's wrong with you? You don't behave like that. And if you do behave like that, it shows me you don't have what it takes to be the king. You don't have what it takes to be the Kohen. I need a certain kind of person to do that. And in the same way, Shaul lost his Melucha for that, Reuven loses Melucha for that as well. Because that sort of behavior ruins a king. Now, we're going to mention one last idea, which I think is a beautiful idea. The idea of the Meshech Chochmah, which is an idea that's brought out, that many people have mentioned in the past. It's on page 274, right before the brachas of Yaakov to his children. We read the following. This is 274 in the Art Scroll Chumash. It is Parak Mem Ches Pasuk Chav Beis 48:22. Va'ani and I Yaakov nasati l'cha. I will give you Shechem achad alachecha. I'll give you Shechem, an extra portion more than your brothers. That's so he gave Yosef the city of Shechem. Asher lakachti mi ad Emori, that I took from the Emori, becharbi uvekashti, with my sword and with my bow. If you look at the Targum doesn't say sword and bow. The Targum says bitzloisi b'ba'usi. Different types of prayer. Now, what's the difference between a sword and a bow? What are the two different types of prayers? Right? By the way, if you look, for example, in Kaddish, I was just discussing with Alex Klein today. What does it mean? Tiskabel tzeloson uva uson. The whole Beis Yisrael. May they be accepted. Tzeloson is the prayers. Uva uson is the supplications. So beautiful. Like you go through the art school, it's just another synonym for prayer. Maybe accepted the prayers and the prayers and the prayers and the prayers and the prayers. It's like Yisbarach Visrama Visrama Visnasa Vishara Visala Vishalosh made a good Shamricha. Right? What do all these words mean? Each word means something else. We just don't know what they mean because you've not really defined them. So you look in the art scroll and they'll give you another English translation, but they all mean we will praise and we will laud and we will give a great supplication, whatever the words are. So what's the difference between tzloson and ba'uson, tzlusi ba'usi? So Rashi says, not Rashi, sorry, the Meshech Chochmah explains that there are two types of prayer. There's a prayer called a cherev, and there's a prayer like a keshes. A cherev is a sword, a keshes is a bow and arrow. And there's a very big difference between a sword and between a bow and arrow. And the difference is as follows. The sword refers to the prayer that was created by Chazal. Chazal created prayers, and those prayers have a power that's an internal power. Just like a sword is sharp on its own. The danger of the sword has nothing to do, is not so much dependent on the power that is employed when you move the sword. Because if somebody puts their hand down and I slowly move the sword over their hand, I could still cut their hand with that. It's still very dangerous because a sword has an internal sharpness that does the job regardless of how hard I hit. Obviously, the harder I hit, the more powerful it will be. But even without that, it's got a power. A sword has an internal power. A bow and arrow, or if you were to think of it in modern terms, I remember years ago, I was once with a friend of mine. They were traveling through Vienna from Toronto to Israel. They were traveling through Vienna, and I was on my way to Israel, and they were also on the way to Israel. I met them in the airport. Hey, how are you, Shlomo? Nice to meet you. And he's going through the metal detector, and the thing goes haywire. Beep, beep, and they start taking apart his whole bag. And finally, they open up inside his tefillin bag. They pull out this round from an Uzi gun, about this big. And the policeman's standing there, and he's looking at this poor yeshiva boch, and he's going, "What is that?" And he's like, "Oh." Yeah, that's one of those oh moments. But really, what was it? Many times, there are times, especially in the olden days. Nowadays, I don't think they do it so much anymore. But in the olden days, when you were in Israel, and you went over to a soldier and asked a soldier for a bullet, oftentimes the soldiers just gave you a bullet to keep, right? It was like a memento for being it's this crazy country. Like if people ask soldiers for bullets. Imagine walking over to a cop here in Manchester. One of the few armed police officers says, "Hey, those look cool. Could I get one of those bullets, please, sir?" Can you imagine what he would say? I mean, they'd try to arrest you or something. In Israel, you're going on a bus with these guys with these huge rifles, and you ask them for a bullet. Ken, vakasha kama, chadosh time, kama totze, one or two, one for your friend, gam lecha, gam lechabes, said, and out they go. Give you the bullets. So he's got this big bullet in his bag. He's like, I got it from an Israeli soldier. They're like, why are you taking it on the plane? He says, no, I've had it in my tefillin bag for years. For last year, I forgot about it. You can have it, take it. Like, I don't need it. But I was thinking to myself, quite honestly, a bullet from a machine gun without a machine gun is not much of a weapon. You can touch it, you can hold it, you can squeeze the top. It's not going to do much. The danger of the bullet from the machine gun is only because it's attached to the machine gun. And when I push the button on the machine gun, it comes shooting out at tremendous velocity and can pierce chas v'sholom people's, whatever it is. That's the danger of it. But it's not as dangerous as a sword. I can hold the bullet in my hand, I can touch it, I can poke it, nothing's going to happen to me. As long as I don't poke too hard, right? Whereas a sword, I'm not going to poke the sword. If I poke the sword, I'll be left with half a finger, chas v'sholom. You don't poke a sword. You don't touch it. You only touch the handle. You never touch the sword itself. You can touch the bullet itself because the strength of the bullet lies in the way it's propelled forward. Right? not so much in the actual bullet. The bullet is only as strong as being propelled forward. If I shoot it and I shoot with a bad gun, it just go fall on the floor, do nothing, right? And therefore, that's the difference between slusi and vosi. Charbi the kashti, my sword and my bullet. I have prayers that have been created by Chazal. Chazal created prayers that have their own internal strength to them. And therefore, because these prayers have their own internal strength to them, therefore, they have a koyach. They have their power, regardless of how much or how little kavanah I have. They still have a minimum amount of power. Of course, the more kavanah I have with those prayers, the more potent the sword is going to be, right? If I go like this with a sword, or if I start wielding it back and forth, it's much more dangerous the more I wield it than when I just like move it slightly back and forth. Not the same thing. Why? Because there is still power within it. But even if I wield the sword very, very gently, it's still a powerful weapon. The keshes, the bow, is not a powerful weapon without the actual energy that's been placed in it, the potential energy that makes it fly as far as it goes and makes it go as fast as it goes. Without that, it's not dangerous. An arrow that if I don't know how to shoot a bow and arrow and I shoot it and it lands in front of somebody, it's not a dangerous piece. It falls on the floor, picks it up, it goes, look, it's an arrow. Nothing there, nothing to do with it. I can hold it, I can play with it, I can turn it, I can crack it, nothing to do with it. So that's the difference. That's personal prayer. If I'm not going to use Chazal's prayers, I'm going to create my own prayers. You better hurl them well. You better, if you're going to be praying for your own things, you're going to be using your own words, you really need to put in a lot of velocity. You really need to put in a lot of kayach, because if you don't, then it's very weak. An arrow that's shot in a weak manner doesn't hit its target. A sword that touches the person that they're trying to harm, even in a weak manner, will still draw blood. There's a difference there. And that's the difference between Slos and Navos and Chaim Bevekashti. One is official prayer, and that's the prayer that Chazal have created for us, that has its internal potency and can be made even more potent with kavanah. And one is my own prayers that without kavanah don't have the potency, and with kavanah are the most potent prayer that you can have. That's B'charbi B'kashi, the two types of prayer. And we need to know that these are two types of prayer. We can use both prayers, and we should use both prayers. We should use our own personal prayers, and we should use Chazal's prayers together. And we should, we pray that all our prayers should be answered. And with that, we'll leave you. Next week, I have a wedding. So next week, we won't have a shir on Tuesday night. But Mitzvah Shem the week after, look forward. Hopefully, we'll have a shir then. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for those who join me on Torah anytime. If you want to get in touch, it's davideisenberg@gmail.com. Thank you for those who join me on Facebook Live and for those who join me on Zoom. Have a good night.
Thank you very much for David.
Thank you, Mochi. Thank you, everybody.
Good evening.